All right, let's do it. Welcome to another episode of the Launch Notes podcast. I'm Blake Thorne from Launch Notes. Really excited to be joined today by Patrick Thompson, who's joining us from Amplitude, where he's a director of product. Patrick, welcome to the Launch Notes podcast. Thanks so much for being here, man.
Blake, excited to be here, and thanks for having me.
Let's do the quick kind of tour of your background and how you found your way into PM, because I know you had kind of cracked into product work. They were working on other things before that. I think there was maybe a startup in the mix. Let's get the kind of quick tour of your background.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, it was definitely a roundabout road. I don't think any journey here is very linear. I first started actually out my career in marketing. So funny enough, I was sitting underneath the CMO at an early stage startup, doing mostly conversion rate optimization. So primarily focusing on analytics and experimentation and A/B testing. So kind of managed a backlog of experiments from that perspective, focusing on growing the business, but didn't traditionally sit within kind of building product. And that was kind of one of the things that I was very excited by. I had a background in business and eventually ended up transitioning over into more of a product design role, not actually a product manager role. I moved up to San Francisco, worked for a variety of different startups. Eventually ended up reporting to Vern Parmar, who was VP of product at a company called Ascendant. And he kind of took me under his wing, brought me over to the next company that he joined as a product manager, kind of dipped my toes into that water for about 3 years. I will definitely say the water was a bit warmer than I expected. I think I was hopefully not swimming too fast and keeping my head afloat. I actually met my co-founder there at that company where he was the co-founder of, and we ended up starting a company together called Iteratively. I had a stint at Atlassian for 4 years where I actually met Travis and Tyler, the rest of the Launch Notes team there, where I was more on the design leadership side. But eventually kind of jumped ship, went over, did a startup. And that was really kind of where I cut my teeth on the product management world, had to learn a lot about product strategy, prioritization, go-to-market, sales. I had to be very, very T-shaped. And eventually kind of after 2 years got acquired by Amplitude. And it's where I'm currently at as a director of product with a team of PMs reporting to me, really focusing on some of our new product initiatives, as well as improving the quality of data teams send into Amplitude. So while I think it's easy to look back, it was definitely not a very well mapped journey at the beginning of my career.
Yeah. That's a pattern I've noticed, though, is you tell the story and it makes perfect sense. And as you know, no career path is totally linear. Nothing ever goes according to plan exactly. But, folks like you and others who are good at what they do a nice job of sort of making it all kind of cohesive and make sense when you give the recap like that. So that's pretty cool.
I was definitely blessed with the opportunity to move up to the Bay early in my career, where I think that was
for sure
instrumental in some of my success. I think there's definitely a lot of good that came from that transition. And then I think obviously I had a couple of folks who took a really keen interest in my career, who gave me a lot of advice early on and kind of help shape that direction. And then I think one of the biggest advices I give to people is just keep your eyes open for new opportunities. And, there's the Jim Carrey movie, which is always an interesting one around not saying no. Yeah. And I think I had a lot of opportunities come by and jumped on them. And that was definitely something that I would recommend for folks, is just keep your eyes open.
Yeah. That's awesome. Were you in I think our overlap at Atlassian, because I was at Atlassian 2016 to 2019. So we were probably in the same office there, that their office in Soma, probably.
Yeah. 7
Harrison Street. Yeah. And then they moved to the bigger one in the financial district, and probably 17 or 18, they moved to that bigger tower.
Yeah, I was fortunate. I did 2 years in San Francisco at 7th and Harrison, working on growth at Atlassian, and then moved to Sydney kind of at HQ for 2 years. So that's where I had an opportunity to go work on Greenhouse, and then eventually that transitioned over to leading design for Jira Software. And that was a fun experience to not only live in Sydney, but be, I'd say, closer to the mothership.
Yeah, I imagine.
It was awesome.
Nice. Very cool. Maybe tell us a little more about Amplitude and maybe just like kind of what that company is doing, what you've been working on there, because it's a really compelling company and category. Obviously, a lot of people working in product know about it. I feel like if you don't, by now you should. But the whole kind of like realm of product analytics is super interesting, and has been kind of on this like exciting trajectory for a couple of years now. Can you maybe just kind of give us the landscape there and some of the exciting stuff going on with Amplitude and the whole product analytics category?
Yeah, happy to. Amplitude's a digital analytics platform. So we're not just a product analytics company these days.
Sure,
we're
sure.
a multi-product company. We do obviously product analytics. We do experimentation. We have a customer development platform or a customer data platform that makes it easy for you to capture and then federate your data to a bunch of different platforms. But you can kind of think of Amplitude as mission is really help teams build better software. And the way that we want to do that is through data-driven decision making. So we're really trying to kind of have that entire build measure loop handled within one application where you can go in, generate a unique insight based off quantitative data, be able to ship an experiment, and then be able to measure the outcome of the work that you do as a team. And we're really trying to build the entire end-to-end tool set that enables that for organizations.
Very cool. Yeah. And it's a really, that's for a lot of folks, like it's easy to sort of take for granted the kind of sophistication of tools that you have access to like that now. And, you kind of think back in the day, like all this stuff that you can like make database decisions on, like you may have not have ever even had a record of it. Like it never would have gotten logged. It never would have gotten, but now it's like every click basically that every action a user takes can be sort of like measured and analyzed and sort of used as fuel to create insights and business decisions and stuff like that. And it sounds like you guys have kind of widened the aperture beyond that even, which is super exciting.
Yeah, and I think this is where I remember giving a talk at Atlassian actually on, qualitative and quantitative data. I think Amplitude is very focused on the quantitative data, and obviously there's the qualitative data, customer feedback, sentiment, support ticket analysis. There's a bunch of other inputs that you get into your kind of product management arsenal that helps you inform great decision making. But I think the quantitative side was typically only gated to your Googles, your Netflix, your Amazons of the world, the ones that had big data science teams who can actually analyze this and generate unique insights. And now, obviously, with tools like Amplitude in the mix, like it's very easy to democratize data-driven decision-making. It's really easy to give folks like product managers, beyond just data analysts, data scientists, the ability to be able to go analyze their customer experience and then obviously use that insight to generate and inform hypotheses and decisions that they make around their product roadmap or strategy.
Yeah. No, that's such a great point. And I love that. And it's one of my favorite things about working in this industry is like, that is kind of like the macro trend of like all things where it's like the kind of democratizing things that used to only be available to folks with massive resources or massive, head starts and cash and stuff like that, where it's like, great, now whether it's like cloud architecture or product analytics or, this tool or that, open source program or whatever, it's just like, we're kind of in the business of saying like, okay, what do massive enterprises have only, they can access now and now we can make like available to, to companies big and small. Like that's such like a fun part of working in this industry.
Yeah, I think the democratizing access is great. I think the other thing that we're very focused on is speed of insight as well. So even traditionally, right, if you think about the number of iterations that you have within kind of build, measure, learn loop, what we call the insights to action loop at Amplitude, it's, if you're only doing 1 or 2 cycles of iteration every quarter, like obviously your ability to be successful and learn and iterate is going to be impacted. But if we can make it easy enough for you to capture data, generate the unique insight, do the post analysis inside of our product quicker, then obviously you can have more iterations and reach better outcomes much sooner. And then fine tune that decision making intuition that you have as a product manager, as a team.
Yeah. I mean, this might be a real kind of novice question, but bear with me because I've bumped up against all sorts of examples of stuff like this, like the teams I've worked on where it's like, great, we've got like all this access to data and information, but sort of like kind of translating that into an insight or like knowing what questions to ask, like knowing what corners to look around, knowing how to like collate into insights. Like how do you all, from like a kind of product builder perspective, like how do you think about like enabling users to actually turn, data and records into insights and into, questions and answers and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this also stems kind of from the big data transition that we've had over the last decade, where folks wanted to capture tons and tons of information, not just about customer behavior, but other types of data as well, with the assumption that data is valuable, and then eventually they're going to analyze this, or eventually they're going to be able to generate insights that kind of move the business forward. I think one of the things that I would say I am, and I would say Amplitude as well, is be a little bit more opinionated around what questions or success metrics you want to instrument, what are really driving your business forward. Yeah. I think the best way to do this is to really borrow from Reforge here and really just define your growth model for your business. And once you've defined your growth model, instrumenting every single loop, every single interaction that really is a input or output metric of that growth model, and understanding that, like, hey, if I was to change this particular loop as an example, this is the expected outcome of that. And then that's kind of what we classify as kind of our tier 1 metrics or tier 1 instrumentation, and making sure that that's all kind of locked and loaded. And then when you think about kind of the exploratory analysis, obviously there's cases where you're not going to know every question you're going to have before you ship a feature or ship a product. And so when it comes to exploratory analysis, it's understanding, are there any kind of proxy metrics that you can use? Are there any other types of queries that you might be able to analyze from your database, from Amplitude, from other places, to give you enough signal to be able to make an informed decision? And then eventually, obviously, going in and instrumenting that. That was one of the reasons we called iteratively, was because instrumentation and data is a very iterative process. At the end of the day, you're not going to get it right from day zero. You're going to have to continually instrument and re-instrument depending on your business needs and as your business evolves.
Yeah. I imagine that can be maybe not the most obvious realization to other stakeholders in the business, though. I bet there's a lot of folks who are like, oh, data, or, BI insights, analysis, whatever. It's like plug it in. Now it's up and running. Now we can get we can get what we need out of it. But the best building blocks approach might be something that I picture you having to convince people of that in certain organizations.
Yeah, the best analogy I do is I'm actually borrowing from software engineering here, is to treat analytics kind of like test coverage, where it's like obviously you're never going to hit 100% test coverage for code quality, but like if you have this desired outcome of like, hey, what's good enough for us to be able to power the business? And then when you think about test coverage, as you ship each new feature you ship, you're going to obviously write unit tests or end-to-end tests or include them into your existing end-to-end tests. It doesn't always happen, as an example. But if you think about analytics as an iterative part of your SDLC, your software development lifecycle, you think about instrumentation from a kind of a code coverage perspective. That's the best analogy that I have that really kind of helps engineers and product managers and other business stakeholders get aligned, where it's like, obviously, we wouldn't want to ship features without tests. We wouldn't want to ship features or experiments without analytics. It's just part of the cost of doing business these days. I think the one thing that you run into is this kind of, I'd say, headwind within a lot of more, I wouldn't say bad product managers. I would say just people who aren't necessarily as informed, where a lot of times when you come to speed of shipping, like you want to get things out the door as quickly as you can. And one of the first things that typically goes is analytics. And I think this is an easy thing where it's like, if your CEO asks you like, hey, how do you know that this experiment was successful? Or how do you know that this feature was successful, and you don't have instrumentation? Really, at the end of the day, that's not the data team's problem. That should be the product manager's problem. Like, you're the one that's ultimately responsible for the success of the work that your team's working on. And that's one of the things where I think we as an industry, we have to get better at just like making sure that, one, we can obviously educate everyone about the value of data, and then two, make it as easy as possible to instrument and capture high quality data that your business can rely on. And then also organizationally, leadership needs to care about data as well and reward data driven decision making in the processes that they do. Again, we don't want to be a feature factory here, just shipping work after work after work. We want to make sure that we're highlighting key wins that are really moving the business forward. And it's like the whole, like, data driven and like making data driven decisions has become like, it became like the ultimate buzzword in the industry, and almost like cliche to the point where it's like, I'm always sort of back into the question, like give me an example. Like, are you really, or are you just sort of like paying lip service to that? But no, I mean, you make a great point there. I think it's interesting. Even if you look at, I use ADG3 from Atlassian, which you're obviously probably familiar with.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. You're giving me flashbacks now. Yeah.
where, we launched and for folks who are not ex-Atlassians, we launched a new version of our design language and a new navigation, and it was kind of a complete visual refresh of our application. And this was I would say, it was a 12+ month effort across hundreds of people internally. And when you think about data informed versus data driven, I think our quantitative measures for that project actually, when we initially shipped, were conclusively false. But at the end of the day, we still ended up shipping that experience because it put us in a situation where we can build upon kind of this new foundational layer, even though that the experiment that we set out to do and the success measures for that experiment didn't have the desired outcome that we originally hoped to have. And, this goes back into some things are too big to fail, where, if you think about data-driven, data-informed, I definitely fall into the camp of data-informed, not necessarily data-driven at the end of the day. And there's obviously a lot of other signals. There's business strategy that has to take into account on what you're doing as well, if it aligns to the organizational goals. But one of the things that this highlights for me is this notion of data maturity. I think we talk about data maturity a lot, and there's different scales of data maturity within different industries and verticals, as well as organizations. And one of the things that we looked at for our ICP with Iteratively, our ideal customer profile, was some sense of data maturity. And you can think about low, medium, and high maturity organizations. And like every model at the end of the day is flawed, but this was one that was super helpful for us to understand, are we talking to a low mature organization who's not doing things like experimentation? They don't really care about instrumentation. And most of the decisions that they're making are either HIPPO or they're just based off gut and intuition. And if you kind of think about this as a knowledge management problem, if you document all your decisions, one of the things I loved about Atlassian was DACEs, but a lot of people use RACEs or other things. You document your decisions, and you have a decision catalog of all the decisions that you made. Out of all those decisions, how much of those were informed by data or purely data driven? And this kind of helps you understand, as a percentage of decisions that you're making as an organization, what are the sources of data that you're making them from? And then how data driven are you at the end of the day? And I'd say most organizations are purely, I'd say less than 50% of decisions are made through data. They're more made through intuition and gut. But if you look at certain industries like e-commerce, B2C, marketplaces, these industries are anecdotally way more data driven. They rely on data, and they rely on data way more heavily. And the people that they hire value data. And it makes the job an analytics provider or a data team much easier.
Yeah. It's such I'm always referencing this, like the whole world of B2C and like e-com is a great sort of subset of that you mentioned. Like so many things with from go to market to analytics to, to sales and marketing and branding. It's like, there's so many lessons in that world for for B2B builders and B2B companies. And that's sort of the trends are going. And you think about the world of B2C, the unit economics of their products are such that they can't have these long, expensive sales cycles with a bunch of executives in the room for every, they're selling something that might be $20, $30 that they, so in order to sort of tap in and operate at scale, they do it with data and insights and very mature ways of operating. And it can be very easy in B2B world to think you're in this ivory tower, but it's man, they're doing some very sophisticated things on the B2C side because the business model demands it, right? Won't allow it for you to operate it.
Yeah. I've worked at both extremes, right? I started out in e-commerce where, we had enough traffic and enough marketing spend where we can make really quick decisions and iterate really, really quickly on ad copy to user experience to everything, versus you go into B2B and even at Atlassian where we had, millions and millions of monthly active users and thousands of weekly signups, it was still hard for us to do what I call high velocity experimentation. It would still take us weeks, if not months, to get results back on some of the experiments that we're running, which is just not the case for most B2C organizations that are operating at the scale of, Tinder or other types of organizations where you just have a massive customer base. And, part of me I've worked in B2B now for roughly the last 10 plus years of my career, like obviously it's super exciting when I think about that.
Yeah.
I've also worked at organizations like EMC where we had a 10,000 person field sales team, right? And at the end of the day, you do your EBRs, QBRs, and your sales team is very incentivized to tell you what you should be building as a product manager. Yeah. And that is the other side of the spectrum. And I feel like, the nice thing about product-led sales and PLG and even, as an example, I think Atlassian's in kind of the sweet spot where you can still inform decisions based off customer feedback and some of the needs of your largest enterprise organizations, but also really build from a bottoms-up mentality where you're focusing on building a very easy-to-use experience, focusing on onboarding and growth at the end of the day. And I'd say even Amplitude has a nice split there where we do have a growth team. We are working heavily on improving the ease of use of the product experience. We're focusing a lot on onboarding and activation while still obviously trying to satisfy the needs of our sales and field team when it comes to enterprise adoption.
Yeah. I want to come back. I want to visit something that you mentioned a minute or two ago around just like data maturity of organizations. And you mentioned you kind of classify them as like low, medium, high. As you think through that, like walk me through like what would be maybe like the hallmarks or the tenets that you would look for in like, if like what's a low maturity organization, medium, high, like what are the actual things that you might see that would indicate like what level an organization is at?
Yeah, it does go back to my earlier point around like if you have a catalog of decisions, what percentage of those decisions are made informed from data, and it could be qual or quant data. I think this is actually part of the job of a product manager at the end of the day. Before you prioritize anything, before you start work on anything, obviously going through, analyzing all your customer feedback, understanding the motivations, like who am I building for? Why am I building this? How do I know what success looks like? Those are the three questions I typically ask of any feature that we're working on. Yeah. And obviously some of the data that you can use there is quantitative, right? Some of the data you can use there is qualitative. Understanding the blend between those two is kind of the magic spot in my mind. The reality is I still feel like most organizations fall into that low to medium spectrum. There's very few organizations who are achieving like 90% of decision making, 90+% of decision making through data. And I'm mostly looking at R&D and product development, not necessarily go to market or other teams, although I would classify them as part of the organization as well. But typically you have this kind of, unfortunately, you have this huge divide between go to market and R&D or product development most of the times. But within product development, I'd say most cases, most teams still rely heavily on intuition and gut. They don't think about things through an experimentation philosophy, and they don't look to invalidate their ideas. They're looking to validate their ideas. I think this is a key distinction that I think about when I think about data-driven organizations is quite often you have a null hypothesis, right? You're trying to like prove or disprove the idea. I think most PMs, I would say the vast majority of PMs are trying to prove out their ideas, whereas I'd say really good PMs are trying to disprove their ideas. They're trying to fail fast.
Interesting. Yeah.
That's one of the things that I'd say good PMs kind of manage is like, they don't have to be the smartest person in the room. They just have to have a process at which they can fail quick. And if their ideas fail, that's great. If the other people's ideas fail, that's great. It's the goal is as a team, we're successful. And that one key distinction is very, very hopeful to kind of outline a healthy organization who's trying to fail fast, essentially.
Yeah, very cool. Very, very cool. Yeah, that almost reminds me of something you said around, and I'm about to get way over my skis technically because I'm not a programmer, but you sort of made a comparison earlier to like test-driven software development. And my understanding around test-driven software development is like, we will build the test and then build the thing and like see if the thing fails against the test which we've created. And that kind of seems to dovetail right with your idea of like, we will take this hypothesis or assumption and see if it fails against this rather than trying to just validate it because we're rooting for it or something.
Yeah, I think it also goes back into, humans and systems are relatively simple. Like it's always based off incentives, right? And so like engineers, like you're incentivized to build high quality code and mostly focus on reliability. Reliability, performance, these are the metrics that most engineers do, right? So when engineer instruments systems, they're typically instrumenting something like some application performance monitoring tool, Datadog. They have a log monitoring tool, Sentry, LogRocket, you name it. And so engineers and like they have, Cypress or some sort of test system, end-to-end test system in place as product, and they're incentivized from that perspective, from a career growth perspective, right? That's what, if you look at the engineering career ladders, a lot of times it's application performance, reliability. Those are the things that are quite often talked about and what most engineering managers care about. When you look at product managers, it's typically, obviously, we want to outcomes over outputs. We want to be outcome driven. At the end of the day, we want to have successful business outcomes. Most product managers are incentivized based off the outcomes of the work that they're doing, right? So when you think about success theater, a lot of the times when people are talking about the work that they've been doing, they're only highlighting the successes. They're not highlighting the failures. And I think you're incentivized as a PM in most organizations to highlight the successes and the key wins that you've had that move the business forward. You're not incentivized to highlight all of the failures or learnings that you've had that make it so that the next bet or the next experiment you ship has a higher percentage chance of success, right? And at the end of the day, I think organizations that incentivize product managers to fail fast and incentivize learning and adopting kind of this outcome-driven process of working have a higher likelihood of success in the market. And those PMs will grow much faster and have a better career trajectory than PMs who are rewarded for short-term gains and or highlighting only the wins that they've had.
Yeah, for sure. I wanna shift gears a little bit into just like other parts of because we've talked a lot on the analytics side, obviously already, but like anything else in the sort of like PM stack or like PM like builders toolkit that whether it's specific tools or like kind of like categories of tooling or versus that are kind of in your tool bag right now or something you're excited about?
I mean, obviously, I love the Atlassian stack, and still to this day, I'm a huge Atlassian fanboy. So
sure.
Most of the tools, I'm definitely more of a people over process and tools type of person. So when I think about the things that I utilize more often, it's like the Atlassian playbook. So like all the plays that we developed there that I use pretty much on a weekly basis. The ability to facilitate, whether or not that's in person or remotely, using a tool like Miro has been extremely helpful for my career. So I think it's more of these softer skills, less so the harder tools that I use. I mean, obviously I am a fan, like launch notes and other tools that allow me to communicate with my customers. So at Iteratively, we use Intercom, launch notes, big fan of Notion as well, although we're using Confluence now, and I am happy to be back on that. And then obviously product adoption software, user flow. Excited about a new one that came out called Dops. So making it really easy for you to communicate to your customers the things that you changed, do change boarding, change management, essentially. Found really good success with that. The engagement platform at Atlassian, which is what we built internally. And obviously there's now tools that make this much, much easier. So there's not really much else that I use. I mean, as a manager, most of my days are filled in meetings and on Slack and Zoom. So I'm kind of out of the tools realm, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. What about whether it's, specific tools or technologies or ways of working, ways of thinking and operating even, what do you think PMs are going to have to get stronger at maybe than, they've had to so far?
So when I think about what makes a really great PM, I think obviously the ability to communicate succinctly is always helpful, right? So you can be as factually accurate as you want, but if people can't understand what you're saying, or if it's not easy for folks to retain the information that you're saying, it's not usable. So brevity is always something that I tend to lean for, which is like short, concise answers while documenting your decisions, being transparent around how you're making decisions, and really bringing people along on the journey. I think where things tend to fail is when you kind of have this you tend to have more of the dictator type product manager who's like, hey, this is the way. And people are like, well, I don't think this is the way. And at the end of the day, it's like your job as a PM is to help bring the team along on the journey. But at the end of the day, it's also to help facilitate and gather as much information as you can from the team as well to help define what that journey actually looks like. And the best PMs I feel like are the ones that are pushing from behind, not leading from the front. And I feel like there's this cultural misconception around, this magnanimous person, which is this PM archetype. And there's many different ways of being a great product manager. And I feel like great product managers are the ones who obviously lead from behind. They help set the vision. They help articulate where not only should the business go, but the product and the needs of the customer, essentially. And so I think for me, it's like clear communication, being able to bring everyone along on the journey and documenting the process, documenting the decisions. And I'd say lastly, the only other thing I would recommend for folks is like, they should not only be the voice of the customer, they should know their customer better than anybody else in the business. And I would say not just by like a factor of 1, but like a factor of 10, right? So when somebody talks about a customer, you're like, I know that customer's pain points. I know the people who are using my product within that customer, within that account, B2B. I know every single problem they have. I know their organizational OKRs. I know their metrics. I know this customer enough where I could go join them and hit the ground running on day 0 if I was to join my company. And I feel like that level of obsession is hard for a lot of folks, because you have to go understand multiple different businesses. You have to understand exactly how to make your customer successful, make that company successful in the context of B2B. And this might be a little bit different in B2C context. I obviously have a bias towards B2B, but knowing your customers, and tangentially knowing your product better than anybody else as well. There's a lot of folks. I think there's also this bias, the higher in the organization you get, where I feel like you get a little bit more disconnected from the product that you're selling. Right. Senior leaders, VPs, C-suite haven't necessarily used the product, or they aren't using the product as a customer. And so they don't necessarily experience the pain that customers are facing, right? And if you're, again, a lot of the times you're not necessarily building for yourself, you're building for your customer base. And in the context of Amplitude is really nice. In the context of Atlassian, it was really nice because we were effectively our customer to some extent. We were dogfooding Jira every single day. We were dogfooding Amplitude every single day. And it makes it easier to build or have that degree of empathy or compassion for your customer. But the higher up you get, I feel like you have to fight this organizational disconnect of not being the customer or not using the product. And the farther away you get from that person, the easier it is for you to make type 1 errors when it comes to decision making. Like, oh, I'm not going to invest in usability, or I'm not going to invest in performance because I don't see them as a problem. Instead, I'm going to invest in feature functionality that's blocking people.
There's so many execs too that are like, oh, I use the product every day, but it's like, you're kind of like an executive read-only mode at this point. Like, you look at some dashboards and you glean some reports and stuff from whatever the product is, but there's these layers. There's a layer below that where you're hands-on, creating the data and instrumenting things, and even below that where it's I'm on the ground setting it up and configuring and you're not Mr. Executive monkeying around with the permission settings. If a new hey, we hired someone new but they used to work here before, so their email address has changed but their employee ID is the same, we got to do something here. It's just you're not feeling that pain point.
I feel like there's a lot of people who I think struggle with the player coach model, where you were the player at the end of the day. You were, let's assume you were a senior product manager and you get promoted into group product manager and eventually end up at director or VP level. And then you're like, oh, I'm used to having hands-on, and this could be the same for design. This could be the same for engineering. It doesn't really matter. You were an engineer and you were writing code, and now you're not writing code, and you have a preconceived way of what good looks like. And I think there's a struggle going into management of kind of letting go and handing over the reins to somebody else. And I've definitely felt that myself. I think the hardest part is the higher up in the organization you get, is the finding that inertia to disconnect from the product and disconnect from the customer. And I'd say disconnect from the product experience. And I think for me, coming from Atlassian and more aligning with my core principles as a product manager, is I'm very obsessed or obsessive about building a great product. And that is something that I try to instill in everybody that I work with, and I try to up level from a team perspective. but doesn't necessarily always align, I'd say, horizontally with other counterparts that I work with and other folks. And it's something that I take pride in and encourages me to show up every single day, is to build a great product for customers who I love. And that's something that I think really does make for a great PM.
I loved every point you made too around knowing the customer. And it's like, it's such an important thing to develop. And like you said, it's like, for me, a hallmark of that, when I run across, PMs, or a lot of times like folks who are really great at sales, like I've interacted with some sales folks who are like excellent at this. Like the hallmark for me is like when they know not just like the stated motivations, or like basically they know what's behind the things the customer tells them. It's not just like, okay, like I went to the call, or like I've interviewed some customers and they told me this is important, they told me that's important. Like they know like that, plus like the ulterior motives, plus the people around that person in the organization who aren't on that call or on that research call or on that sales call, plus that person's, explicit and implicit motives, and the dynamics between the two and the tensions within. Like there's so much that like goes into like really getting inside that perspective. And too many people just have this face value understanding of like, yeah, this is what the customer told me is important, so I know the customer.
Yeah, I think this is the thing, right? Like when you think about incentives and incentive alignment, right? Like salespeople are incentivized to understand their customer beyond any measurable doubt, right? They're, as a product manager, if you have salespeople telling you like, hey, this is what's blocking this customer from being successful, the reason that they're telling you that is because it's actually impacting their comp.
Right.
And so like they're very incentivized to give you feedback. And I love working with the go-to-market team. I love working with sales. I love working with solutions consulting. I love working with professional services because they're very transparent and honest and direct with what's causing the customer pain. And as a product manager, I think this is a great source of data when it comes into what you're prioritizing on your roadmap and overall strategy of how you're allocating resources to some extent. Because these are people who are talking to customers every single day. And obviously, I think PM should do that as well. But if you're not, as a product manager, as an example, these are the people that you can use as kind of a proxy for that. And I think one of the best things to do as a PM is to develop those skill set yourself. So for me, like customer discovery is my favorite tool within my tool chest, right? Like I love talking to customers. I love trying to understand their motivations. And these are skills that I developed through my sales and go-to-market experience through iteratively. This wasn't something that I did as a PM previously, or not as well, let's just to say that. And if you think about product managers, go try to sell your product. Like spend a week or 2 weeks, shadow a salesperson, go try to sell the product, go understand what is stopping, what's hindering sales, what's slowing it down. And if you can actually provide concrete recommendations, you don't even have to build features, but provide concrete recommendations, do some enablement with your field teams, like that's going to go a long way to not only establishing trust with these people, but also helping them be successful. And at the end of the day, I think as a PM, is that obviously you have your customer and your goal is to get them successful, but tangentially related, if you can help other people be successful within their roles within your company, you're not only going to build much better equity within the organization. 100%. It's going to help you get shit done later on when you have an account that's gone red and it's because of something that the product or R&D team did to have strong ties with that go-to-market team.
Yeah. That reminds me. The past startup I was at. I was on the GTM side, but we sort of partnered with PMs in the R&D side. And long story short, we opened up a bunch of new demo requests and basically said like, hey, like alongside the sales, the account reps and the account executives handling these calls, like folks on GTM and product managers are actually going to like do some demos. Like you should be able to demo the product and like do some of the first and second calls with prospects on this. And it's like, man, talk about like, getting alignment and like getting buy-in with the sales organization and like understanding like to actually sit there and pitch the product and give the demo and take the questions. Like, there's nothing that kind of compares to that. Right. So that was a great experience. I would recommend to anyone.
Yeah. I think there's this misperception also in product management as well, where I think a lot of PMs, especially ones that are more earlier in their careers, don't find these things as valuable. They want to work with engineers, they want to work with designers, they want to brainstorm, they want to collaborate and ship product.
Yeah.
But the higher up you go in your role, the more you're a salesperson at the end of the day. You move into a director role, you're talking to more customers, you're helping alleviate their concerns, you're doing EBRs, QBRs. You move into a VP role, you're primarily working not with just like the market and analysts, but you're also working with your largest accounts. And you have kind of customer advisory board of effectively your top 10, top 20 accounts. 100%. And this is the thing where if you can develop those skill sets earlier, it's going to be less reasons, like there's going to be less resistance to moving up the ladder. I'd say, and especially if you can show that you're adding value to your go-to-market counterparts. I think that's a great way to establish the skills needed in order to be successful at the, not just the good product manager role, but the director or VP level role. Yeah.
I've always sort of seen sales and the ability to sell as like just one of those like cornerstone foundational skills. Like you can take your career in so many places, you can build so many different like things upon that foundation. But like if you kind of have that early on and like know what to do with it.
One of the things that I think, and I strongly agree, is like everyone's responsible for sales, and it doesn't matter if you're on the go-to-market team or you're on the R&D product development team. Everyone at the end of the day, like as a business, we have clearly defined goals for what success looks like from a revenue, new accounts perspective. And the more you can lean in to help the business be successful, the more at the end of the day, like you're going to be successful. Obviously, nothing scales infinitely. But there's a lot that we can do as product managers, as engineers, as designers to help folks on the other side of the table be successful at their jobs. So I wouldn't shy away from that. I would definitely lean in and actually see what you can do, talk to people, build relationships. And again, these are just new skills that are helpful the higher you move up in the organization. Yeah, absolutely. All great topics. I could talk about this all day. I'm sure you could too. Want to be respectful of your time. We could wrap up with two super fun ones that I ask everyone. First, what's the kind of, and maybe we touched on some of it already, but what's the one piece of like conventional wisdom that maybe other people in your role would have or hold, but you would push back against? This is a spicy topic.
Almost like I ask on purpose.
It's so. Generally, while I'm a big believer of work-life balance and I believe in exercise, I believe in eating healthy, I believe in everything good in moderation. I think early on in your career, especially what made me successful is just working harder than I possibly could imagine. I spent a lot of time in my 20s and early 30s putting in a lot of hours, fine-tuning my skills and trying to become the best I could possibly be. And I think this definitely stems from being a collegiate D1 athlete. And that was what got me to college. That's what got me successful in sports. And I definitely applied that same mentality to my career. I definitely say it doesn't have to necessarily be for a particular company, right? Like you can go freelance, you can go have your side hustle, but becoming great at whatever you do, whether or not that's engineering, design, product management, is definitely something I feel like has a negative connotation today, or that I would say the way that I became good at my job was just putting in the hours. I think that's pretty contentious.
I like that. My prediction for 2023, hustle has gotten a bad rap over the last couple of years. I think it's gonna come back. People are gonna times are gonna get kind of hairy here, and people are gonna realize that hustle was a good thing, and we maybe overcorrected a little bit. And I'm a big fan of that point of view, and I'm a big fan of like you have seasons of your life, and like whatever sort of season you're in, whatever that balance looks like, fully hustle on that and commit to that and work hard on that. And maybe when you're early in your career, just out of college, not a lot of other commitments and responsibilities, like maybe that balance looks like, 90% employment, 10%, fitness or whatever. And like maybe as you get older, like that shifts, maybe family becomes a big part of it. And so like I'm a firm believer in that, like, you should, whatever your balance looks like, apply your hustle toward that. Right.
Yeah. And someone who just started a family as well, right? Like my priorities had definitely shifted. As
For sure. Yeah.
somebody who's has a 2.5-month-old baby boy.
Yeah.
I'd say like similar to what I guess I'd echo your comment, which is like just be thoughtful on whether or not this is a growth year for you or a rest year. And I had one of my managers, Robert Dietz, who's VP of Design at Atlassian, phrase it that way to me. And that was actually super helpful because when I was in Sydney, I was like, hey, okay, this is going to be a rest year for me. I'm definitely going to enjoy traveling. I'm going to, have more of a work-life balance, enjoy the beach when I was living in Sydney.
Yeah.
And it was very helpful for me to be thoughtful about that versus be like, hey, this is a growth year for me. And I'm actually going to work my ass off to be as successful as I possibly can be and make the team as successful as they can be.
Yeah.
So it is worth, I think, having that distinction and finding the right balance and understanding that it's seasonal. It can change from month to month or quarter to quarter or year to year.
100%. Last one. I like asking product people about products. Go figure. It could be something at work. It could be even just like on the outside of work side, maybe something for the new baby, who knows? But what's a product that you've been like kind of geeked about lately or seems kind of cool, something you're excited about looking forward to trying?
Yeah. So, post-acquisition, I definitely got more into investing. And one of the products that I really enjoyed, and we were a Carta shop iteratively for our cap table management, but I've been more excited about AngelList, I'd say. And I think that they just continue to execute very, very well and have expanded out into multiple different categories. So that's a company that I'm pretty excited by, and I've been following them for a few years. I think they've just built a really good product experience as well. And then the other one that I really have been excited about is a company called Spot Virtual, which is doing kind of remote collaboration, but they basically are making it really easy for you to collaborate virtually in both asynchronous and asynchronous fashion.
Very cool.
Kind of trying to bridge the gap, I'd say, with the modern workforce.
Nice. Was that Spot Virtual?
Correct.
Nice. Have not heard of that one. We'll have to check it out. Well, thanks I know we went a little long, but it's great topics to spend some time on. Really appreciate it. If folks want to say hi or connect or something like that, what's the best way they could do that?
Yeah, you can definitely find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. My Twitter handle is PatrickT010. You can find me on pretty much all social media via that.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here with us, Patrick. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Blake.
Yep. See ya.